Okay, Mr. Chair, thanks for rolling.
All right,
Let the festivities begin.
all right. I'm going to call the West Dakota Water Development District October 11th meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd stand, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
with
indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call of members. Dan?
Okay, roll call, October 11th, 2022. Code.
Here.
Bjerke.
Here.
Driscoll. Here. McGregor.
Here.
Nautigal.
Here.
Roll. Mack.
Here.
Fleming.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Okay, we have one director absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum. Excellent. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda for today. Is there any?
I wonder if, because Jesse got here on time, Dan, would you mind if we moved them up?
No problem.
Would you like to do that so you can
Okay, well, let's see.
put them
Where should we put them? Then?
after number 7? After,
Okay, after number 7.
That'd be both 11 and 12.
yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah,
Makes good sense.
11 and 12. Very good. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, I have a motion for approval for the agenda.
So moved.
So moved by Dan Driscoll. Is there a second? Seconded by Thomas Mack. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 4 is approval of the minutes from the August meeting. Are there any additions, corrections to the minutes from the August meeting?
Move to approve.
Moved by Dan Driscoll for approval. Is there a second? Seconded by Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, item number 5, conflict of interest disclosure. Is there any items on the agenda tonight that any of the board members would have a conflict of interest? If so, say so now. Seeing none, we'll move on to the treasurer's report, number 6. Dan?
Okay. Currently, funds on hand are $565,582. The project expenditures to date are $91,046. And if you add in the other expenditures, total expenditures to date are $130,774. The budget that we approved in August has been sent to the state as required, and the tax levy request has been submitted to the county, so we're all up to date on that. The project report, if there are no questions, excuse me. We have $221,132 in unpaid obligations. And I'll note that the rotating basin project, I got two more invoices from Mid-Continent Testing, so there's actually, this number's out of date, so there's $222 left in the account for that project. So I'll move on if there are no other questions. And here's a breakdown of our bank accounts, which is all of our capital. And as you probably remember, we cashed in our CDs, so everything now, or most of our funds are now in the extreme savings account, which is 0.7% interest rate, and then a little bit in the business savings and the checking. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
All right, is there any questions on the treasurer's report this afternoon? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Been moved by Scott. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Wendy. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, that moves us to item number 7. Oh, here comes Cheryl.
That's quick.
This is
Good thing it was
Direct-
downhill, huh?
Director Cheryl Rowe has arrived at the meeting. Okay, we're on item number 7.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Who was the second on the treasurer's?
Wendy.
Wendy.
No, it's just a win, no.
So we're on item number 7 right now, which is a grant request from the Western Dakota Regional Water System. And got my name on there, and we have 2 representatives here today for discussion on their grant request. Dale Tech is the chairman of the nonprofit corporation, and Cheryl Chapman is the executive director for their organization. So I understand Dale is going to lead off, so you have the floor.
Well, thank you all for having us again today. I was here, I think, back in June for a very informal discussion that we had regarding potential grant funding. But this past month, I believe Cheryl submitted an application to West Dakota Water Development regarding a funding request of $25,000. As you may or may not be aware, and it's included, I believe, in the packet, we did receive an $8 million grant through the State Water Board this past year for most of the engineering work that will be started on the project. We're also anticipating a SWARMS grant. Cheryl, I don't know, you can maybe speak to what SWARMS means later on, but as part of the condition of that grant through the state, we need to have matching funds, a local match of, I believe, 25%. So we're in the process of hitting the road, trying to get additional funding to earn that match for the SWARMS grant. Most of our administrative costs are not covered under the $8 million ARPA funding, and then certainly the SWARMS money is eligible for that. However, we do need the grant. We have approached a number of other entities and requested funding. We don't have any commitments yet, but we anticipate in the very near future we will have a considerable local match from many entities around here, from Rapid Valley Water to the City of Rapid City to Box Elder to West River Lyman Jones and others. So I think that's about the end of what I wanted to say today. If you've got any questions about the application that we submitted, I certainly stand for those, as well as Cheryl, and I think Cheryl's got some additional words she would like to share,
just
too.
to, again, thank this group for getting this whole effort started. You were the catalyst. And then included in some of the early motions was to explore forming a nonprofit to really manage this effort. And the result is the Western Dakota Regional Water System. And so great efforts and foresight on your part, so thank you again for that. As Dale mentioned, we really hope to spread the support throughout many groups for this local match, because so many different entities will benefit from a project like this, and it continues to just build that broad base of support for a major project like this. And so we truly appreciate your consideration of it. As Dale mentioned, West River Water Development District is also taking a similar request under consideration as well.
This $25,000, is that just a one-time, are you gonna be coming back in future years, or is this going to be it for requesting money from West Dakota?
That's a great question, and I think the appropriate response to that is if we can reach our goal of $250,000, it's unlikely that we would be back, but certainly get a year under our belt, start the canvassing, all those other activities to get all the other communities and entities interested in the project. We'll see how far that money goes. We may be back, we may not be. It's difficult to say at this point in time.
Ron, you have questions?
Who are the enrolled members of the regional water system? Dakota Regional Water?
Currently, we are working on membership bylaws. We don't have any enrolled members as of yet. We anticipate at the board meeting next week that we will be adopting the membership bylaws, I think is the correct terminology, and then start soliciting membership from interested parties.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Scott, sorry.
What do you intend your bylaws to say as far as who can be a member? Would this entity, would we be entitled to apply for membership? Or are you looking only at counties, municipalities?
I think I can tackle that one. And again, we're still finalizing it, and there will be a couple tiers of membership for water suppliers. In other words, people who would purchase water for redistribution in their systems. But then we'll have an associate membership, and that is for other entities with strong interest and ties to the project. And I would suspect that's exactly where West Dakota would be. Right now, our proposed membership for that level is $375, I believe. That's what we're talking about with the board.
Is that a one-time membership?
That's an annual membership.
Annual membership, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Certainly like to see, you don't have your bylaws in place.
Bylaws are in place, but there was a pretty simplified version of just one class of membership, and we quickly recognizing we need to have a little bit more sophisticated structure than that, so we're in the process of revising those.
Cheryl?
How many board members will there be, and who would they be?
Currently, there are 7 board members identified. 7?
We had one fellow quit at Hill
Correct.
City.
But our original organization, I believe, was 7.
Yeah.
We're down to 6. Moving forward, the final makeup of the board, we utilized Talbot Wazorek to help us through this process. I'll try to keep this story short, but just to get this off the ground, that's where we came up with the 7 board members, and they're all entities that are in the water business or provide water or distribute water. Once we get the membership rolling along, we may change our bylaws to allow additional board members. Talbot purposely wrote it so we can change it and be flexible based on what our membership is and who's a voting member and who's an associate member, so on and so forth. So that's not set in stone yet, but we will work towards a finality of what the membership looks like and how many are on the board.
Yeah, I think Dan was next.
It's kind of a formality, but we probably should get a motion on the table before we get too far into the discussion end of things.
We can do that.
Ron's got his hand up.
Yeah, I can.
I just had a comment for Mr. Driscoll, is that
No, that's
I
fine.
don't think we need to have a motion until we're, fairly well into the interrogatories and we understand what we're talking about.
Let's continue then. And then we'll have a motion a little bit later. Scott?
Sure, following up on that, how are your board members determined?
Well, we had a annual meeting last year. Actually, it was our kickoff meeting in early December of last year. And at that time, we identified, basically opened it up for membership, and the parties that were there and ready to come to the table were selected.
Basically said, I'll serve, I'll serve.
Exactly, yeah. It was,
And the ones who weren't said, we agree
Right.
with that.
And do they serve a term? Are you gonna have an election? at
we
some
will,
point?
we'll have an annual election, and we are targeting November 29th of this year for our annual meeting.
You'll be getting notice of that soon, but.
And
it's-
and you have your classes of membership, who is entitled to
Dan,
vote
I have something too.
Okay.
for board members?
That is yet to be worked out as part of this bylaw exercise that Talbot's been helping us through. We'll know more at the end of next week.
We've already spent $103,000 for this, right?
You mean on the total project?
Yeah.
I think it's more like 150,000, isn't it?
150.
Yeah, it's close to 150,000.
150,000?
Yeah, approximately. We're from when we started to where we are now, financially, yeah. So, Wendy had a comment or a question.
I have a comment. So, when this first started is, I think, kind of when I first started. So it was my introduction to the water board, and sorry I'm missing you, Cheryl, and
Good to hear you.
always a pleasure to talk to you. I can't think of a better way to spend the taxpayer dollars than something like this that will eventually benefit so many people, so many communities. Yes. I added it up the other day. It's $160,000 we've spent on this.
Right.
That's a drop in the bucket compared to what we've spent over the years for individual type projects, which have merit too. I'm not saying that they don't. But this, and I'm not saying that those don't benefit the community and the group at large for Pennington County. Much of that is surrounding Pennington County. This is way bigger than this, and I'm not going to have a decision after December, but I hope that this, the seeds are planted, and I hope that this group continues to support this effort to bring water to this area through the Missouri River. This group has been spending money to hold their place in the Missouri River for I don't know how long, for something just like this. And if we don't use it, we're going to lose it, is my understanding. And I know there's other sources, but again, I don't have a say after December, but it's such a worthy cause. And that's all I have to say. And I really, well, one more thing. I really appreciate the efforts by Cheryl and her team to keep this going. And you couldn't have a team with more integrity pushing this through. That's it.
Okay. Are there any? Okay. Then you, or not you. All right, now, go ahead.
So, just a quick question. So we approved 25,000 today. Are we the first one on the books that have agreed to the 250,000 with an actual vote saying, not we'll consider, but we will give you whatever the funding request?
Yes.
So, when does West River meet for their funding proposal? I'm just curious. I'm just trying to see, because I always see with especially this project, we're usually the ones leading out
Yeah.
with the idea that other people are gonna follow behind us, and I'm just curious about that.
They're meeting next Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, and other groups, I think within the next 4 to 6 weeks, most of our requests will be acted upon. As we sent out letters, we didn't send them out cold. We talked to everybody ahead of time, and I'm fairly confident you may be the first, but you won't be the last in terms of making that contribution.
And then just a quick follow-up,
Go ahead.
if I may. When do you need the money, like, to get the grant? When's the time frame?
We're hoping to raise this local match yet this calendar year.
Okay.
We may have a little give on that, and we're still in discussions with the state on that. But
Okay, thank you.
yes.
Okay. So we would be cutting a check to your organization, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any more comments? Is something
I
you
think
want
I'd
to
rather be last than first.
You'd rather be last than first?
Yeah. I'd like to see how these other members and people pony up money, given that we've already put 150,000 into this, before we come out first with another 25.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I think we probably got the questions we were looking for answered, so maybe now is the time for a motion. So at this point, I'm gonna move, at this point in time, to deny the request, for the particular reasons that, we specifically put out, some guidance for proposals to come in, and one of those was to have, identified, financial partners and how West Dakota might come into play. And at this time, it sounds like we really don't have that information in front of us. As Director McGregor said, we've already got $150,000 into this, so I would move to deny at this time.
I'll second that with the understanding.
Dan, I have a comment on that.
Okay, the motion's been made to deny the request, seconded by Scott. Discussion on the motion. Dan Driscoll.
I'd ask Director Koth, would you be open to, as opposed to saying deny, to defer action until our December meeting and see what else we've got coming in? I share the same concerns that we've been the front end of the funding scenario all along. I'd like to see how the other funding shakes out, but rather than say deny, I'd be willing to consider it again in December.
Well, I said at this time, I think it's premature for us to fund it at this juncture. There may be a time down the road when we could consider it, but again, in the intent that we made, and transmitted through.
I have discussion, Dan.
Okay.
Was that, we put the seed money in and we helped them form the organization, and their members were then to be carrying on with the actual implementation of the effort. So I guess I'm amenable to that, but I'm not very excited about more money going to this organization at this time without any input from their members.
Well, I'm comfortable with the wording that as long as, is it our intent that we would be willing to reconsider this at a future date?
Well, I think that's possible. Anytime they want to come back, they can give us more information, but right now it's not a complete proposal. We don't have any financial disclosure from the members that might be participating.
I'm on the same page with you, just kind of semantics, so.
Sure.
Other comments?
Okay. I agree with, Scott saying maybe let's not be first. Would it be feasible or workable for us to consider this in December of this year?
Absolutely.
And then at that time, you would know what the other future members can bring to the table.
I have a comment, Dan.
Sure.
Why wouldn't we be first? This is not our money. This is taxpayer money. This is their water. We've spent $25,000 or less on projects, and this is why I'm done. Just for the record, Malali, this is why I'm done. We've spent money on way less significant projects than this. Why wouldn't we be first? You are the stewards. We are the stewards of taxpayer dollars. Water coming over here. I get that there's pieces and parts that need to be tied out, but I don't get why you would not be trailblazing on something like this. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay. I'm going to be voting against the motion. I tend to agree with what Wendy said. I think, yeah, we've invested a lot of money getting this program to where it is. And we have a 10,000 acre foot future use water permit for water from Missouri River, and which eventually is going to come out here to serve our potential customers, water customers in the future. It might be 30 years down the road or whatever, like some of these other rural water systems across South Dakota. It didn't happen overnight. And I agree. I think that we need to continue to support this project as West Dakota Water Development District and make sure this thing carries forward. So I will not be voting in favor of this motion on the floor. Any other comments? Not seeing anything?
Is the motion going to stay deny or
Yeah, that's what he said.
rather than defer?
That's what the motion was.
It doesn't matter. It sounds like they're gonna come back.
I would be
when they have
agreeable
more
with
information. Defer is fine.
Yeah, defer is fine.
So we're amending the motion?
Just instead of denying.
Well, if the
Yeah,
motion maker wants to change the motion and the second agrees to that, then we can change it, right?
Yeah, I'm amenable to changing it to defer if you're amenable to that recommendation.
Scott, is that okay with you, Scott?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna change the original motion then to rather say deny, defer. To defer it to a future meeting.
The December meeting?
We can bring it up at any meeting, I guess, so. All right, I will vote for that then, with that in there, because I don't want this thing just to die on the vine, asking money from West Dakota Water Development District. That's my personal opinion. Is there any other, so the motion now is, would you read that motion, Dan?
Motion by Coth, second, because I have it loud. Okay. Motion by Coth, seconded by McGregor to defer request. Let me look this up here.
To a future meeting.
Should I repeat it?
I think he said it was to defer it to a future meeting.
Okay. Motion by Coth, seconded by McGregor to defer request to a future meeting.
Okay? Everybody understand the motion?
Yep.
All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion
Nay.
carried. Oh,
When is our next meeting?
December, the second Tuesday in December, so whatever date that is.
So not
But,
those and no.
yeah, Wendy was a no.
Have my Christmas shopping done, I'll make it.
No. Well, you have something else?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all the directors for considering our application for a grant today. Appreciate the
We
discussion.
appreciate you coming.
And we'll be back, so,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully you have some more money to report to us, that you got some more money. We will. Okay, thank you. Okay, we made a change in our agenda. So items number 11 and 12 we've moved up next. And we have representatives here from DNR to talk about the rotating basin project sampling program that went on this year, and the one coming up next year. And Linda, I'll let you introduce the folks from the DNR.
Okay. Well, first of all, Board, thank you for letting me change the agenda. Originally, Jesse is on his way home from vacation, and just flew in at, 2:30 this afternoon, and we weren't sure if, he might be delayed, so we had him at the end, but since they're both here now, we'll let them give us an update on the first round of sampling of the rotating basins project, which we approved the funding for at our March meeting. So Jesse Wilkins and
Jordan,
Fosvet. Yeah,
It's a weird one.
thank you.
Would you like to sit here by the slides, or would you prefer?
Wherever there's a
yeah,
microphone.
we need to have you speak into the microphone.
So I'm Jordan Fosfet from the Department of Ag and Natural Resources and the Watershed Protection Program, and we're here to talk to you about our results from this first season of the sampling for rotating basins. And this is Jesse Wilkins.
Yep, just made it.
Yep. So for Project Progress, we sampled both lakes and streams. There was 26 lakes we sampled. We sampled every single one of them 3 times except for Newell Lake. And we ended up taking that off of our sampling list because the dam was breached. The first visit when Jesse went there, couldn't get the boat in the water. It wasn't really boatable. So after talking to Game Fish and Parks and other people in our program, we've decided to come back to that lake and sample it at a later date once the dam is rebuilt and it's more representative of the real ecology and chemistry. And then for the 66 stream sites, all of those stream sites were sampled each month, May to September, except for a few that were dry or had no flow. Victoria Creek was completely dry August and September, and Elm Creek was just some pools across the bed in the September visit. So we didn't sample those. It's not really representative of the water quality. Anything to add there?
Oh, that was great.
Okay. So first, some of our stream results we have, we'll look at E. coli. We use E. coli as an indicator of fecal contamination. There's 2 standards we look at for that. Limited contact would be if you're standing on the shore fishing or if you're just on a kayak or a boat. And the standard for that is 1,178 most probable number of E. coli. Then the second standard we have is for immersion recreation. So that'd be if you're swimming in the water, and that number is a little lower because there's more of a risk if you're actually swimming that you'd ingest some of the E. coli. That standard, we want it to be below 235 most probable number of E. coli. So of the 269 E. coli samples we took from May to August, we don't have the September results from Mid-Continent at this point in time. And that's for all of our stream results. We'll just be looking at what we have from May to August. So 37 of those samples were over the standard. There was multiple exceedances on the Cheyenne River and on Rapid Creek, and those are the bigger circles on that map. There was a few that actually were over the standard every single time we sampled them from May to August. So, next slide.
Those ones, those large ones on Rapid Creek, are they below the fairgrounds?
Yes, they are. I think it was segment 4 and 5.
Okay.
So one of those is right out of town, and then the next one would be out on Farmingdale Road.
Okay.
Then dissolved oxygen is another thing we look at. The standards for that are all pertaining to what kind of fishery the stream is supporting. So cold water permanent fish propagation, that would be Spearfish Creek in the Redwater River. We want greater than 6 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen. And then for all of the other fishery types, we just want greater than 5 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen. There's only 2 exceedances in this round of sampling, one on the Belfouche River north of Sturgis, and then the second one was on Flynn Creek in Custer State Park. So that's not really something we need to be concerned about in the Black Hills. Next slide. pH is another one we don't really have a lot to say about. The standard for pH just needs to be from 6.5 to 9 pH. we didn't have any exceedances above or below that standard on streams this year. But the average across all of the sites we sampled was 8.13. And then the last thing on streams that I'll talk about is total suspended solids. Suspended solids is just a measure of the suspended sediment in the water, and there's 4 different standards for that. Relating to the different fisheries that we have in the hills. So for the cold water permanent fishery, it just needs to be below 53 milligrams per liter. For cold water marginal, warm water permanent, and warm water semi-permanent fish propagation, we want it to be below 158 milligrams per liter. And then for warm water marginal fish life propagation, we just want it to be below 263 milligrams per liter. And that's a lot of standards to keep straight, but across all of the sites we sampled, we do have every type of fishery among those. So that's another map that shows the number of exceedances per sampling, and it was common on the Cheyenne River to have high suspended solids, and then pretty rare in the Black Hills to have the higher suspended solids numbers. And then Jesse can talk about some of our lake results next.
Thank you. So for E. coli on lake monitoring, every time we visit a lake, we collect an E. coli sample. We typically collect those at a swimming beach if there's one there. If not, we move to a boat ramp or a canoe access or something like that. Kind of moving down the list of what's used the most. The standards are the same as streams, except for pretty much all lakes in the state have the immersion recreation beneficial use. So they have the standard of 235 MPN for E. coli. Out of the 75 E. coli samples we collected, 5 exceeded that standard of 235. The most common was Newell City Pond. 2 of the 3 samples there exceeded. So there might be some local sources of E. coli there. Dakota Lake and Sheridan Lake each had 1 exceed, as well as Stockade Lake. Stockade is notable because we sampled Stockade for our statewide lake assessment. That's our state lake monitoring program. And exceeded, I think, 2 of the 3 samples last year as well. So there's a chance, I don't want to say for sure because that's analysis has to be done yet and there will be more data, but there's a good chance that Stockade might be listed as impaired in the 2024 integrated report for E. coli. So we'll see. We'll be sampling it again this coming year. Hopefully we don't see any more exceedances there. All other samples, 70-75, met the water quality standard for E. coli. Next slide, please. For pH, it's the same standard ranges for streams, 6.5 to 9. We never see anything below 6.5. It's almost, you never see anything below 7. pH is usually highest at the surface of the lake and lowest near the lake bottom. It's highest at the surface because you have algae there and other microorganisms photosynthesizing. There's biological activity that tends to increase the pH. So it'll be higher at the surface, lower near the sediments. 11 of 75 surface measurements. Well, let me back up. We go to 3 spots on the lake, and we make measurements at each of those 3 locations to get a better representation of the lake. We average those 3 surface measurements to get a value to compare to the standard to present to you guys. We also measure much lower. We measure every meter down until we get to the bottom, but we haven't had the time to go through that data yet and do any analysis and see what that looks like. It's notable that the standard only applies above what's called the thermocline. That's where the top warmer oxygenated layer is separated from the lower layer. So our standard only applies to above that thermocline there anyway. So we looked at the surface samples. We averaged the 3 locations, and of those, 11 of the 75 exceeded 9. Legion Lake, all 3 visits, the average of those 3 surface measurements exceeded 9. Bismarck and Center Lake, 2 of the 3 visits. Horse Thief, Lakota, New Wall, and Sylvan had 1 visit average pH exceed 9. And there might be some listings in the 2024 integrated report for this as well. A lot of these lakes have been listed for pH in the past. We've written a Black Hills Lakes pH TMDL, so it's unlikely that there would need to be any total maximum daily load reports written in regard to these waters. But yeah, it's well known in our agency that some of these Black Hills lakes have a pH issue. Yes?
What's the practical issue with high pH? Is there kind of a problem does it cause, if any?
I think it affects aquatic life. I can't tell you specifically how, or I can't tell you the history of the standard, why we cut it off at 9 either. I'm not entirely sure on that. We'd probably have to ask the standards folks in the surface water program. But I think that as you get more basic, you're going to start to see effects to aquatic life.
Just curious, I'm a bit surprised you listed several lakes like, was it Legion and Sylvan? You know,
Yep.
I mean, we tend to be high pH, especially in the limestone areas. I mean, that high 7s are on into the 8s, you know, up in the granitics. I guess it just comes as a surprise, but probably because I'm not particularly informed on why.
Sure. We usually see it in lakes that have had more nutrification. They're more productive systems. And so, I mean, these are very clear lakes, but they some of these ones, maybe they had some historic sewage inputs or other inputs. I wasn't there, I can't say for sure. But some of these lakes behave a little differently. You know, like Sheridan behaves differently than Pactola and Deerfield. It's not as clear. It's more productive. And that's where we tend to see those higher pHs is in the lakes that have a little more productivity.
Just curiosity.
Sure.
Is it the plant productivity that also increases it, or?
Plants and algae.
Yeah.
Yep. So basically most living things in the water
You know,
there.
'cause, you know, Stockade has always seemed to have a lot of algae.
Yes.
And I think they're on Game Fish and Parks list for the region in the future.
Sure. Next slide, please. Dissolved oxygen. Similar to pH, it's usually highest at the surface, lowest at the bottom. It's highest at the surface because the air is reoxygenating that water through re-aeration. That's also where most of the algae hangs out, undergoes photosynthesis, which produces oxygen. The lake sediments consume oxygen and lower oxygen levels near the sediment interface layer with the water. As far as standards go, again, as Jordan mentioned, we have multiple standards. Cold water permanent fisheries, 6 milligrams per liter. All our other fisheries are 5. Again, like pH, the standard only applies above the thermocline, so the upper warmer oxygenated layer. It also applies for oxygen, and this is notable, to the metalimnion, which is that boundary between the upper epilimnion and the lower hypolimnion. So it applies in the transition zone as well. But we only had one surface measurement that didn't meet the standard. That was Cox Lake, which was kind of curious, to where I went and checked the calibration, and Jordan was the one there. She checked the calibration on our instrument. I then reviewed, when I saw the data, I reviewed the calibration records and everything else. It's like, yeah, this is a legitimate measurement. Cox Lake is crystal clear. We measured it as, what was it, 61 feet deep?
Something like that.
I think so, yeah. Oxygen was good the whole way to the bottom, pretty much. I assume it has something to do with groundwater inputs or the unique nature of that lake, the fact that it's tiny and it's 60 feet deep. Behaves a little differently. Next slide, please. Total nitrogen. I calculated total nitrogen to summarize our nitrogen results because we had sampled for total Kjeldahl nitrogen, which is, you could think of it as organic nitrogen, nitrogen that's bound up in living things. Nitrate, nitrite, and we also sampled for ammonia as nitrogen. If you add TKN, that's total Kjeldahl nitrogen, to nitrate, nitrite, you get total nitrogen, which gives you an overall estimate of your nitrogen. The results were really as expected. Those larger circles are higher concentrations. The smaller circles are lower concentrations. Out in the prairie, as we would expect to see, we had higher concentrations of nitrogen and we had lower concentrations in the hills. A lot of that relates to the nutrient concentrations in the soils. Much lower nutrient concentrations in the Black Hill soils and rock versus out on the prairie. Next slide, please. I did plot these all out in the graph just to kind of show the how lakes compare to one another as well. On the left, you have your deer fields and the very high quality lakes. Those are all in a flat line because never in any of our samples did there was detectable nitrogen. I'm sure that there's nitrogen there, but the lab wasn't able to measure it. On the right-hand side, you have your prairie lakes that are more productive, like New Underwood and Bear Butte Lake and lakes such as those. Next slide, please. Total phosphorus, pretty much the exact same story. It's another nutrient that causes algal and plant growth, like nitrogen. We see higher concentrations on the prairie than we do in the Black Hills. Next slide, please. We did have one kind of outlier result. New Underwood Lake was over 3 times higher than any other lake, which was a curiosity. Perhaps there must be a local phosphorus source somewhere in that watershed. Natural or man-made, I can't say. We haven't looked into that, but just very notable that was much higher than everything else. And then on the left, again, you have your high-quality stuff, like the Mirror Lakes, Cottonwood, Pactola, again. Next slide, please. Total suspended solids, we just say TSS because it's a mouthful. Most lakes were non-detect on all 3 samples, so the lab couldn't detect any TSS there. The ones that did have some TSS were like Bear Butte, New Underwood, Curlew. None of those came anywhere near the water quality standards, so no exceedances of the TSS standard. Next slide, please. Total dissolved solids, so dissolved organic and inorganic substances such as calcium, sodium, potassium, chloride, sulfates, nitrates. These correlate strongly with specific conductance, which I'm not going to present that to you because it's basically the same result, just measured in a different way. We see higher TDS concentrations out on the prairie where we have the saltier soils. We see much lower concentrations in the Black Hills. On the southern end of the hills there, you kind of see, in I think Cottonwood Springs and Cold Brook, you see a little higher concentrations. But in the core of the Black Hills, it's next to nothing for total dissolved solids. Out on the prairie, they're quite high. Next slide, please. Alkalinity. Alkalinity was kind of all over the place. That's the capacity of the water to resist pH changes, or particularly acidification. It's basically how well the water is buffered against acids. We measure this in milligrams per liter calcium carbonate. The notable thing that I thought was those 4 lakes right there with the very tiny dots in sort of the eastern Black Hills there, where we saw very low alkalinity. Everything else had a good capacity to resist pH changes. Those lakes were quite low. Can't say a lot about it other than that. Next slide, please. So some things that didn't go well for us. I didn't present chlorophyll A to you, which is our estimate of the algal biomass. So it's a way of saying how much algae is growing in this lake. We had some strange results from our spectrophotometer. We process these samples in-house. We have our own gear. We do that to save money. Unfortunately, it's worked for 20, 30 years, but unfortunately this year our spectrophotometer broke before it was realized that it was broken, and a lot of the samples were run. We're trying to figure out which results we think are legitimate and which aren't. So I'm not going to present any information until we've had the time to go through that data and figure out what it means and figure out what's viable. We're considering all of our options. We may buy a new spectrophotometer and continue to process those samples ourselves. I've discussed this with Mid-Continent Lab. They're willing to run them for us. It would add some cost to the sample analysis, about $20 per sample, but we only run chlorophyll A on lakes, and what we're asking from you guys for next year would be a very small amount, I think less than $500 increase there. But it would give us an EPA-certified lab to run that parameter for us, and hopefully, if we can send this to Mid-Continent, we should never have this issue again, and that will be resolved. But it was very disappointing. I was hoping to see those chlorophyll results. In the data that we received from Mid-Continent, one of our New Well Lake samples appeared to be missing. However, we know that we sampled it. It's probably just misidentified in the data, and we haven't had the time to go through it and find that one. Probably the most dramatic day of the summer was myself and an intern lost our YSI EXO multimeter over the side of the boat on Ormond Dam in 37 feet of water. Those cost about $15,000, so it was kind of a big deal. Next slide, please. However, we ran back to Rapid City and got some fishing tackle, and I got my paddlefish snagging rod, and I had happened to drop a GPS point where we lost that over the side, and I could identify it on the sonar, and after about 2 hours of dragging treble hooks around, I caught it. So it still worked. They're very hardy and waterproof, so retrieved that $15,000 there or so, which was it was a huge relief. You hate to lose gear. We completed all the possible sampling that we could do. We got our work done, basically. We did what we said we were going to do, which gives me confidence that we'll be able to do that next year. And yeah, our staff, huge thanks to our staff who were awesome and showed up every day and got to work. And thanks to you guys for providing funding for those samples. And next slide, please. I think that's all we got.
Any questions?
Can we have a copy of that for our website?
Absolutely.
It's on there.
Is it already?
I had just asked him, I thought it wasn't real practical to put it in our packet because there were so many colored photos.
Yeah.
But we will
So
put
you
it
can
on
zoom
the,
in and
yeah,
look.
we'll put it on the
Just wanna make sure
website.
it's
You're a
on.
good straight man, thank you.
Yes?
Any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Maybe I missed it, the exceedances for Rapid Creek, were they the immersion standards?
It depends on the beneficial use that each segment is assigned, and
You said there were 2 spots.
Yeah.
Below
So
there.
that map that we made, each site is based on its own beneficial use. So we didn't do it just for one standard. It's determined by individual
Okay,
site.
So you're just saying something failed or something was exceeded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head if those parts of Rapid Creek are immersion
I'm kind of
or.
wondering how the one above the wastewater treatment plant compared with the one below it. There was significant changes there.
We didn't specifically look at that, did we?
But you said
Unless
you
you
looked at
did?
farming.
I've glanced at it, but not enough
Okay.
to feel confident answering that question.
Fair enough.
But
One of those
all of
circles-
those results are up on WQ map. You can.
Have
One
we
of those
approved all of
circles
it
was above the wastewater plant. One was above the way I understood your sampling point.
Yes.
Was above the wastewater plant.
We sample all the segments of Rapid Creek.
And then Farmingdale, of course, is downstream.
Yep.
So,
I think we
So
sample.
probably the St. Patrick site.
So there's one that we sample on St. Patrick's Street across from the Humane Society.
yes.
Then the next one is right below the water treatment plant on, I believe, Reservoir Road. And
Rapid
then-
Valley's water treatment plant.
Yes, and then the last one is on Farmingdale Road.
Okay.
And then one more. Somebody is looking, maybe Director Harris, you know that, verifying these are within the West Dakota Water Development District. Is that correct? These,
Which ones?
You mean the ones we're paying for?
yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We only asked for funding for sampling
So I
within
don't
the
need to
district.
look into that at all.
I'll trust you.
No.
I guess unless we get more results.
Okay.
You said you don't have the,
For streams, we don't have the September results yet because we were sampling way into the end of.
Yep.
yeah. So we would just have to look at September's, but
Okay,
so
because
far
I-
they,
I'm just assuming the invoice that Mid-Continent sends us is for one of those within the West Dakota Water Development District.
So for the stream sites, there are 66 total sites. Only 17 of those were determined to be within the West Dakota district.
Okay.
And I would advise reviewing the invoices because occasionally they do mess up and bill things the wrong
and I can do
places.
that when you get the next batch.
They're pretty reliable, but everybody makes mistakes.
Any more questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
what do you do with this data?
So the main thing that we do with it is we use it to assess whether waters are meeting their standards under the Clean Water Act. That's one of the main goals that we have in collecting this data. The second would be for writing those total maximum daily load reports, where that's for impaired waters, where we determine the pollution sources and how much we need to reduce them to meet the water quality standards. Third is for just looking at human health risk, for example, E. coli sampling, where it might pose a risk to
And
human
when
health.
you make those determinations,
Yeah, you need 2 votes. Sorry.
So
That's right.
it depends. So if we determine that a lake's impaired or a stream, that opens up funding to do remediation efforts, for restoration efforts. Because unless a water body is impaired, we can't put those Section 319 Clean Water Act funds towards water quality improvements. So it basically opens up the door to us to approach landowners and ask if they're voluntarily willing to help us restore that water body. So we would do cost share programs with them. What we call BMPs, best management practices, things like riparian buffer strips, feedlot renovations, things like that.
How much of that do you actually do?
A lot. We get, what is it, I think it's about 2.3 million a year in Section 319 funds. Most of that goes out to what we call implementation or restoration projects. We have a very large one going on in the James Basin. We've got what used to be the Central Big Sioux, I think it's now the Big Sioux River project. We've got the Glacial Lakes project. Yeah, the Belfouche, we partner with the Belfouche Irrigation District, and we do a lot of work up there. Most of that's transitioning from flood irrigation to sprinklers to reduce water usage as well as runoff.
How much do you have going on in Pennington County west of Cheyenne?
Nothing right now. We're always looking at opening new projects. We've been looking into Spearfish Creek lately. But basically it's a matter of having a partner. We need a partner in a watershed to work with. So if we have a partner there, because there needs to be matching funds. We need match for those funds. Plus we need coordinators, boots on the ground to implement those efforts. If we don't have that, we don't have staff at the state level to get that work done. We more oversee the contracts, and we hire people to do that on the ground work, such as Belfouche River Irrigation District.
Is it accurate that to a large extent there's really a need just to obtain baseline data for places where we've not had it before?
Absolutely. And when I transferred out here last spring, or actually I should go back a few more years before that, when I took over the statewide lake monitoring efforts, we had lakes such as Pactola or Compesca up in Cottington County that hadn't been sampled in 10 years. We have no idea what went on with those lakes in 10 years other than what locals witnessed. And so we've been working really hard to change that. Rotating basins is our biggest effort towards that. Plus we bolstered our statewide lake monitoring program. We sample a lot more lakes now than we used to. Just to have that baseline data, because 30, 50, 100 years from now, people will be asking, what were these water bodies like? Unless you have that objective data, those numbers, you can't really say. You just go off people's memories, which are fallible. So it's very valuable in a historical sense, and just understanding the condition of our waters.
Well, the concept of rotating, I mean, it's not worth the cost to sample over and over and over again in locations that really don't need it. Check in, get it, come back a few years later. That's a pretty good concept.
Yeah. Well, and it really is the best that we can do. That's what we do is water quality monitoring. So if you give us the funds, we'll monitor everything, But with the available funding and staff that we have, that's what we're able to accomplish. And it's sufficient. It's enough. You spend 2 years in a watershed, you sample it very aggressively, you get data for everything. That provides you enough data to assess these waters under the Clean Water Act as well, because like for lakes, we need to have 2 years of data where you visited that lake at least 2 times to assess it. And we're required under the Clean Water Act to assess the waters of the state. So this is how we do that. We can't assess them without data because there are minimum data requirements to assess them. For streams, we need 20 samples over the last 5 years. So even with our 2-year sampling effort and getting 5 samples a year, that only gets us to 10. So we need those water quality monitoring network samples from the surface water program at DANR to supplement what we're collecting to then give us enough to be able to assess those waters under the Clean Water Act.
So 2023 is done. When would you come back, and how many years later do you come back and redo it?
So what are we on now? 2022. So we'd come back. It would be 10 years from last year. So we'd come back in 2031.
Okay.
Yeah, because we spent
2031 before you got back.
Yeah, we broke the state into 5 basins. We spend 2 years in each one. So it's the whole shebang is 10 years.
Okay.
2 years in each basin.
Just South Dakota, right?
Yes. Yep.
Where's the rest of the project cost coming from?
DANR 604B and 106 funds, that are Clean Water Act funds that we have the authority to use for this and has been approved by our leadership.
Federal funds?
Yes. Matched by the legislature to a certain extent.
$1.50.
Cheryl, do you have a question?
What's that?
$1.50.
Is there a map that clearly defines the Valley Creek watershed?
I don't have one. We can be made quite easily to delineate that watershed. Yeah, we could get one for you. Yeah, they're out there. There's publications that would contain that information as well as could be done manually.
They've been in various USGS publications, actually. USGS has a website for peak flow information. If you put a dot on a map, it'll delineate automatically, using a GIS tool. So.
Very handy. We use that too.
Thank you very much for coming. We got an action item here, number 12, that will be taken up here next. So
Thank
you for coming. Okay, so
Well, last May when DANR approached us, they thought that the 2-year rotating basins project, they were requesting funds of $44,000. And at our March meeting, we decided that we would only fund the first year, get a report, make our decision if we want to fund the second year of the rotating basins project. Well, in that time, laboratory fee costs have gone up. And we also thought it would be nice to cover the chlorophyll A analyses if Mid-Continent is going to do those. So what we expect is that the funds, well, what we're going to ask for a vote is $26,500 to cover the laboratory analysis fees for the 2023 sampling, which would be May through September. And if for any reason the cost exceeded that, the state will cover anything over the $26,500. And because this amount is over $25,000, it also requires 2 consecutive votes. So this would be the first vote on that proposal. So I would like to make a motion to fund the 2023 rotating basins project for the amount of $26,500.
is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Cheryl. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign.
Aye.
You pose? One opposition.
Huh?
Yeah.
We have any business funding the state.
Okay.
Should be the other way around.
No, from Director McGregor. Motion carries. All right, thanks again for coming, appreciate it.
Many thanks to the board.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so now we're going to, what's shown on your agenda as item number 8. Report back from the committee formed to look at future directions for stormwater mitigation programs. And Dan, you want to take that one?
Well, it's got my name on it, so yes, I will.
You're it.
I suggested the committee, we met, I didn't take notes, I don't recall the date, I don't know that it matters. We can do things informally like that. Our packet says that, Linda was intended to be one of the members. She ended up sick, I think, that day, and so...
Tested positive for COVID, so I thought it was best I stayed home.
Congratulations on having had it and get it out of the way.
Yep.
Know that you hold up to it well. So we took executive action and invited Chairman Bierke to fill in her place, and so we had I guess, I think we came away with a consensus that we would like to see some sort of a program in the future to, try to do a few mitigation projects. That would be to, in essence, locations where we've got relatively large, don't have to be large, where we've got impervious surfaces larger than like the driveway in your house and things like that. We're kind of thinking whether it's churches or libraries or daycare or schools or whatever the case may be, places where we've got impervious surfaces that were constructed before stormwater mitigation was required, to try to find ways to retrofit them with some sort of various mechanisms. The most visible tend to be detention cells or swales, places that store a little water before, give it a chance to settle before it goes straight into the storm gutter, would be the kind of the short story on it. So, we would envision that, I guess our consensus was that in the future we might kind of develop a program with some sort of parameters. How would we administer it? How much match might we put up? How much might we require from the participating entity? But in the near term, we seem to come to consensus that, initially it might help if we could just find, several over time small projects to basically do pilot projects on. And in essence, we really went no farther than that, just kind of have us all perhaps looking over the course of months to come at, might we find locations that look like kind of an easy fix. From, in my personal opinion, I'd just soon start out small. Where are places where, maybe with $5,000 you could fix something easy, as opposed to a $50,000 project. But a lot of it may be just opportunistic. So I guess with that much said, I'll ask the other committee members, do you have different recollections on what we discussed, or different perspectives to throw out on what our discussion was?
Any comments from the other committee members?
I think that kind of captures what we talked about. We talked about trying to take advantage of, the work that has been completed for the board, by combination of
Jason Phillips
school minds and Jason Phillips' work. Yeah. Take advantage of that, and look at what's available in the various basins around the city.
That was this document, full of maps and dots, and we may look at places, are there places where there are something to me that would be ideal would be, might you have 2 or 3 different land ownerships, say a church next to a daycare, next to a whatever, and a private business, and where you might, mitigate 3 different parking lots, roofs and parking lots, with one mitigation project. Could be very opportunistic, and in some cases road construction lends itself to, or a parking lot that needs to be rebuilt. If someone's got a parking lot that's just falling apart and they've got to rebuild the thing, well, that tends to be a pretty good time to maybe change the grading just a little bit. One example I'd pointed out was up by the Alcoholics Anonymous and then the blood bank or blood drive place. There's the alcoholic, the AA parking lot is basically right next to Rapid Creek, and actually one direction where it drains, it does kind of work its way kind of through a grass area, and it's probably okay. And then there's other places it drains straight to the creek, and it's the sort of thing you just have to go look at it and talk to them and find out if there's interest. And kind of go from there, but,
Dan, I have a comment.
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Sure. I respect what Director Driscoll is saying. And I get that there are projects around Rapid City and Pennington County that could benefit from taxpayer dollars. I guess I would challenge this group to look beyond that part of it. We're not here to finance personal property owners. They bought a property the way it was, and I respect what we're trying to do there to some degree, but that's not what I feel like our responsibility is. So yeah, that's all great and that's all fine, but $5,000 per project adds up really, really fast, and it has over 10 years. 25, 5, 10. That money is added up very, very quickly to the benefit of private landowners and School of Mines students. And some of that stuff, we don't even have results of what they did. So again, I respect what Director Driscoll is saying and attempting to do here, but I would challenge this group to think way bigger than $5,000 to $10,000 and little baby projects around Rapid City.
Okay. Is there another meeting planned with the committee, or?
I don't know that I see an immediate need.
Okay.
Just
curious.
Once we get on into the winter season, I personally am a bit more likely to, look a little more closely at that. In the next month or two, I don't see it happening, but I think the next step is really to kind of start looking around and see if we see places where it'd be worth trying to talk to some folks.
Okay.
And I guess, Wendy, I don't know if there's a misimpression. I had a sense that you thought perhaps West Dakota would look to fund the entirety of the project. Of any project, I really don't think that's an intent. I think the intent would be that we would, perhaps assist owners to some extent.
Pay part of it, is what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah, and I get that, and I do respect what you're trying to do. I think you've made amazing contributions, and I'm not trying to discredit that at all. But I also see pushback on bigger things that benefit so many more people and not just private landowners. And that's what I have a problem with, because they bought that property the way it was. And that's, I guess, I'm not asking anybody to fix my drainage system. And I could benefit from different things. So again, I'm not trying to discredit. I really respect what you've done this whole time. I think it's amazing, but I don't think that's what this money is for, respectfully.
Okay. Are you done with your report?
I'm done with mine.
Okay. I guess we'll just move on then. No action, just an update. Item number 9, that's also yours, Dan. Update on the work that we've been doing on erosion control projects here in the last several months.
Put together a few slides here. Wendy's not able to see them, I guess, and you probably didn't email them to her, Dan, but it probably late now. It might help on our next item. It'll continue, the same slideshow will continue into that part of it. But that aside, this slide I had shown, I think, back in our July meeting. This is up along what I've called the head cut on our Star Village project. You know, what you're looking at is 2 lines of wattles. One that's typically, the thing about the head cut is it's basically you go from steep to even steeper, and what we're trying to do is to keep that from enlarging. So typically we put a line of wattles basically right at the toe of the steepest part, and then a second wattle line several feet downhill. You know, there's no specifications. In that case, you can see where the one is anchored by a tree. Oftentimes you look for, you know, where does it fit right. But that photo was taken after a June 20 rainstorm. You can see the little rivulets where where the bare shale had washed, and then up above in the wattle area, that's covered with grass clippings. You know, I've got another retired buddy that, semi-retired, he mows lawns for a living, and many days this summer he's got 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 garbage barrels filled with grass, and I was just experimenting, scattering that on the shale, and lo and behold, it's water repellent, and we've had 3 storms that will move rain or move sediment, and the grass clippings are still there. They're getting kind of beat up, kind of wore out. They won't last forever. But the disappointing thing, and a lot of this has been experimental, before I'd put it down, I'd always throw some grass seed around in there. And none of these areas have grown any grass yet. They've got to have some sort of dirt. You know, it just won't start out in the shale. So the next slide. Oh, just slow on the draw. So here's
Trying to email Wendy this.
here's another head cut area. There were some areas as I spread grass, I kind of held them back. I was mostly putting them in places where it was hard to get to, but there's some areas we're able to get above them with the bobcat that the Wagers continue to let us use, and it's kind of steep, but in this case I was able to drive down to just above where that upper wattle is, and then farther on down there's another wattle, so we'll go down there with a scoop in the bobcat and rattle it out of there, and then we've got a couple volunteers raking it down the hill and spread it out really thin. These are kind of also intermixed in here. There'd been a fire. There's some bare spots up above the head cut getting ready to blow out, but we had Thursday and Friday night in late August. I was at the German tent those nights, and big downpour and then another rain. Well, that's all it took to germinate this stuff. Following that, we had 10 days of 90-degree no precip, and I was kind of worried about it, but these wild grasses, they just sat there and waited, and since then we've had a couple little showers, and it's just growing to beat the band. So the next slide is the same general vicinity, just looking in a different direction, and it's just coming up nice. And typically then what I would do, you can see the grass clippings after it was seeded, you know, I'd scatter grass clippings there, and it turns out it really didn't matter, you know. Linda, you remember the area when you come up that day, we tore apart that dirt pile that was laying there, just kind of borrowed from it. That germinated just fine without having the grass on it. You know, we'd had a suggestion the grass might help it get started, but it certainly holds the dirt there that's there. So the next slide then, just one more view of it, but you can see a bit of a road, a trail there. I kind of pioneered in with the bobcat. We're able to get down that and deliver dirt further down the hill, and so kind of been chipping away at that area a little bit also. But I would say now over the course of the summer, we've probably, what would you guess that we've, Dennis and Dan see it quite often with me. I'm guessing we've covered as much area as what we did last year where we put the blanket down, you know.
I'd say,
or maybe more.
More, yeah.
anyhow,
We had
it's,
about a third of an acre there last year, and this is probably, I'd say probably more than that now.
anyhow, it's
That's definitely growing grass.
step in the right direction. I'm pretty confident, we had a couple more showers. None of our later seedings have come up, but, if it doesn't show up in the next few days, it'll be next spring before it germinates. But
You might mention too that the city's been hauling material for us. The Wiggers donated that 15 acres to the city, Rapid City, and so the Parks Department has been providing some products, some dirt.
yeah, their contribution has been, quite a bit less than what I'd hoped for. They're hoping to be able to help us a bit more later in the fall. Their intentions have been good, but the follow-up, they had given us basically 2 mornings of trucking, and we're getting the compost for free, which is a small thing. Actually, our total expenditures this year are less than $1,700, in the budget. It's mostly been just, sweat equity. But next slide. One of the things we did spend money on was some more silt fencing. So this is up above First Street, and basically one small first rainstorm, the June 20 storm, just barely moved a little dirt there. The next one almost filled it up. So since then we went in and we put another lift in there and had one more storm that's got it into the second lift. But there's several places where we've done that, and so we're holding the sediment on site, and we're winning the war one small battle at a time. It's going to take a lot of time. Next slide. Over at LaCroix, that's what it looked like last year after we put in the wattles. We just got basically one load of the grow wattles in there. They really didn't grow. That experiment hasn't panned out. We'll just go with wood chip wattles from now on. They're so much lighter. The next slide shows this year, and it's not because of the wattles, all that growth you see in there. It just turned out the things grew better this year. It was cool. Once we started getting rain, it stayed cool up through the 4th of July. I was in there 10 days ago now. I harvested a bunch of wild seeds of different sorts, and all the wattles have got a little bench. They've caught sediment, and I just scattered seed in there, and then I took a little raking device and scratched it in. So there's yucca seeds, and that one plant, Ron, that I was asking you, what in the heck is that flower over on Star Village? Blazing Star is the local name. It grows right up out of the shale, and I've got a bucket full of Russian olives in my truck. They're getting scattered in, and choke cherries and milkweed and you name it, So we'll find out what grows. Next slide is 2 small silt fences we put into a real deep draw there, and the one kind of got beat up there from a little runoff event. We beefed it up, and since then that one's filled to the brim. We're going to have to go in there some cool day and put another lift on it. But we've been waiting for the city to come help us with some of these things. I'm just not going to haul wattles in there until we've got city crew to help us. What we've been doing of late, actually, I talked about the bobcat and spreading dirt. Well, we've got 2 big, they're otter sleds that, they're about, the area of them is about half the size of one of these tables, and 2 of them will hold 1 full scoop in the bobcat, and when you slide it down the hill, it's kind of like a neutral buoyancy fishing lure. It sort of just barely slides, or not quite slides, but you can slide it down the hill, turn it sideways, dump it, slide it a little farther, dump it, and back up the hill. And so we're hitting these little small spots, and we're about done for the year. Pheasant season starts this weekend. It'll pick up a little later in the year later in the fall with some other things, see if the city's able to come around then. But beyond that, I guess that's all I've got on it.
Okay. And just
Questions?
for information tonight, no action.
No action needed.
Okay, thank you for the update.
Well, what I've noticed from being there and the photos, you've kept a lot of sediment out of Rapid Creek.
No, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, even that one big downpour down there on First Street, down the bottom of the hill, I mean, there was a very small amount of silt that got off site.
And quite honestly, this year's sediment load wouldn't have been huge. I mean, there's different stopping points along the way, and but there's no doubt that we're holding it back, and we're gaining every, with every, we're gaining. It's going in the right direction.
Okay, that was item number 9. Item number 10. We had a discussion about this when we were working up there. Discuss possible changes to our gauging program with the USGS. And that's kind of your item too, Dan.
Right, so somewhere along the line it occurred to me, the two gauges that we fund are Castle Creek above Deerfield Reservoir, and there's a couple other funding partners there. I think we've got the lion's share of it. But then Rhodes Fork is a spring, what I'd call a headwater spring back in Black Hills hydrology study days. There are various of them around the area. For instance, the largest of them would be on Spearfish Creek, between Little Spearfish Creek and the main fork of Spearfish Creek, and then what I'd always called Hannah Creek or East Fork. Collectively there's typically something on the order of, Little Spearfish Creek was always 13 second feet or more, and Spearfish Creek at Cheyenne Crossing was always, once they turned off the diversion, say, going on 30 second feet. So, 40 second feet or more of spring flow, and it never really diminishes. So, Rhodes Fork, for the period of record dating back to 1982, the bare minimum flow has been 3 cubic feet per second, and those are the daily flows, has never exceeded 10 cubic feet per second, and it very seldom changes. The cost of a gauge is about $16,000 a year, and having been in the business my whole career, it's just kind of like a light came on. I really don't think we should fund the full continuous record gauge anymore, and I talked with the USGS folks, I met with them, we did not put an agreement in place with them. We talked about it, but it's been premature, and so I talked with them about the concept of going to what's called a miscellaneous record, just occasional measurements, and so we'll flesh that out. So the next slide, I thought, well, we ought to examine this. This shows the measurements that were made, the individual measurements. What they do is they visit the site any more about 4 times a year, and each time they measure it, there's a staff gauge. They read the staff gauge and make sure everything's dialed in there. They develop a rating curve, and they use that to come up with your daily flow record and your monthly flows, your annual flows. So the next slide, and I can pull this stuff off, you could pull it off the internet if you knew how. So this shows both Rhodes Fork and Castle Creek on the same plot, and so it shows the individual measurements along with the dots connected by the daily flow record. So in essence, by measuring essentially 4 times a year, we would capture everything we needed to know, in my opinion. And also the correlation with Castle Creek, if you want to make an estimate of monthly flow, annual flow, they correlate. I didn't run a correlation, but it's going to be up in a 90%, R squared or up range, I would guess. Next slide. The other thing you get at at these sites is a peak flow record. What is the largest instantaneous flow each year? And how they derive that, I won't bother to go into the details, but I'd said we really need that, even though there's not much going on at Rhodes Fork. It matters, and I won't go into those details. Well, this turns out to be really interesting through about the year 2000. Basically, peak flow is not much different than average daily flow. But in the 20 years since, something has changed. All of a sudden, we're getting much larger peaks, and we'll get into the rest of the story as we go here. The next slide, I looked at Castle Creek, the peak flow record. Rhodes Fork is only 7.5 square miles. Castle Creek, 79 square miles. It's had two large flows, up towards 1,000 or over 1965 and maybe 1952 or whatever. And other than that, pretty subdued. Right around 2000, there's a little handful that are a bit bigger, and the peaks there are, the largest of them are most of them are, it seldom goes over 100 cubic feet per second. So it's pretty similar to Rhodes Fork relative to drainage area. But we don't have this larger, these larger peaks. Next slide. So I'm just going to say, for the next slide will show the full record for Rhodes Fork again, and then I'll break it out into 5-year increments, and 6 for the last one, just looking for, am I missing anything? So the next slide, Dan, that's the full record again, and right around 2010 there's a gap. There's a reason for that. That was West Dakota quit funding it because of resistance to gauging programs, and then eventually got back to being funded. But so the next slide is going to be the first 5 years of record, and those ovals just show places where the flow went down either really quickly or went up quickly, and I think those are somewhat artificial. Oftentimes when they're developing a rating curve, it takes them a while to get things really right. The next slide is the next 5 years, and there's only one of those sort of periods that looks kind of iffy. Next slide. One there where, that's actually 1993, really wet year. It probably came up.
It was a very wet year that year.
That's probably for real. And you can see the trend continues up. The next slide, nothing stands out. The next slide, nothing really stands out. Next slide. One kind of quick uppy feature, no big deal. Next slide. That's basically, that starts right at resumption after the year of missing data, and so there on the left axis, it probably took a while to get things ironed out. And 2015, who knows? Actually, 2013 there, that was Winter Storm Atlas. It took a while for that to kick in. That really delivered a huge amount of water and groundwater recharge, and I'm kind of surprised not more of a bump there. But next slide. Oh, that's the resumption of, that's the resumption of the data gap. Excuse me. And I may check with them. It's possible they ran that recorder during that gap there. It might be possible to resurrect a record for that period. That would be useful. But next slide. This will show the monthly means broken into 2 periods. The monthly means for the 1982 through 2011. So let's just go to the next slide. I'm probably going to have to get up here close enough to read it. So, all of the values in there are in the vicinity of 3 on up to about 8 cubic feet per second. The next slide is kind of the same thing. And down here are the monthly values, which range from 5.3 to 5.7. There's almost no change there. And then the next slide is for the years that follow. So next slide, the average is 7 cubic feet per second. It's clearly a higher flow rate that's going on kind of during that period when we had higher variability. So the next slide, this is a USGS tool. This is NWIS Mapper, NWIS Mapper, if anyone wants to look at it. So you can click on that point, and it brings up the data, and you can look at it in map view, or you can bring up the satellite update or satellite backdrop. So what you see, the drainage area is kind of going to go out like that and kind of down here. There's almost no timber in there. So the next slide, this is Google Earth from 2013, which is the latest imagery. And I don't know if you can see these darkish areas, but that's bug kill.
Oh.
To whatever extent it ended up being logged, between the bark beetles and the logging, the forest cover is much sparser. And years ago, in hydrology, they like to do watershed studies, how much do you gain water yield? And it's typically, they said, well, you can see a little bit of increase, and it probably matters most with snowfall. If you've got a lot of trees, the snow catches in the trees and then it burns off. It doesn't get down to the snowpack. And this is certainly up in the snow zone. So next slide. We'll stop there. There's one more thing we might look at, but any questions on kind of the roads fork end of things before we change topics?
Did you say that it took 2 years for the atlas to show up on the stream gauges?
Yeah, at Rhodes Fork, it showed up essentially immediately in many of Rhodes Fork is dominated by groundwater discharge. There's almost no surface runoff. So many other streams we saw a very Rapid Creek. I mean, Rapid Creek flowed to beat the band for the next year. So that's specific to Rhodes Fork.
Okay.
So basically, the USGS folks are going to put together a cost estimate. What will it cost for a peak flow record, which their going rate is about $2,000 a year. And then to measure, now they go there about 4 times a year, and so actually they would go there anyhow for a peak flow measurement. They have to go and check what they call a crest stage gauge. It's high tech. It's a pipe with cork in it and a yardstick. And the cork floats up and sticks to the yardstick, and they pull it out, so they get their staff gauge reading, and that tells them how high the water was, and they go to their rating curve and make their peak flow estimate. So, I'm guessing the cost will go down from 16,000 and change to, let's say maybe a few thousand. And this way we won't have to go through all this, when we deal with it in December. So, any more questions?
Do those folks down at the USGS office down here, are they kind of on board with what we're talking about here?
You mean as far as cutting back?
Cutting back.
We're the customer.
Well, I know we are.
We're always right.
Okay.
I mean, it's very common that a customer, a cooperator as they call them, will say, well, I'm no longer interested in that gauge, or I can no longer fund it, I'm tired of funding it, whatever. Sometimes, well, we need a new one. That's less common. But And I haven't actually shared that information with him yet, just because I didn't have time, but I will send it to him. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. I was kind of surprised, about this increase in water yield and how this peak flow record has become more active. But basically this was my bread and butter for 30 years, and I have no doubt that the right thing to do is to cut it back. I mean, there's no point gauging for the sake of gauging.
Sure.
I think we capture all we need with a much more limited program. So
We'd still measure, but cut it, instead of being continuous in
right,
measure.
there will not be a recorder.
Won't be a
There's no satellite telemetry.
Okay.
Actually, their telemetry, typically they send it up into the outer space and it bounces off of meteor trails, I think is stuff. But anyhow, I kind of wondered then, might there be somewhere else that we might want to pick up a bit of flow record and maybe something similar. And the wife and I ride our bikes across Lime Creek, several times a week on the bike path, and it's one of these springs that's similar to Cleghorn Springs, an artesian spring, and there's a lot of influence here from urban runoff, but for this gauge record that spanned from 1988 to 2002, it got down pretty close to zero flow, kind of tail end of the late 80s, and then it bounced on up, from a base flow standpoint, 3 or 4, 5 second feet is kind of the max, and then the peaks are urban runoff.
Well, we drilled that well number 6.
Right.
Right there, probably 1993, 94, where that low spot is.
Right.
That was not flowing.
Well, and actually, so we've got, there was a gauging site, we put in a concrete wall and a V-notch weir right there.
I know where it's at.
Right, so this site is actually down at Canyon Lake Drive. This continuous recorder.
Okay.
There's actually 2 different sites, but this one was operated, I think we put that gauge in as part of the program with the city.
Yeah.
So,
reached the point. We were trying to monitor.
Right, see what the effect is.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that next. So the same thing, even though there's a lot of these spikes, we really don't care about the urban runoff. We could capture the base flow just by measuring. You always want to measure during these quiet periods, a few times a year. So the next slide. This is the water level record for the Madison observation well nearby.
Yeah, city quarry.
And so you can see that it gets up to where it's a flowing well. It's right up by those tennis courts.
Yes.
Up there from Wilderness
I know where
Park.
that's at, yeah.
And there's a lot of variability during the dry periods. It'll be as much as 70 feet below land surface, and so that's what really drives the change in the spring flow is what's the water level of the Madison. And so to date, there's always been enough head there that there's been some flow, at least farther down. Besides, there's one fork of it there by Wilderness Park, the outdoor campus. Those ponds, they come in farther down.
They do, yes.
And then down by Stevens, there's another little bit of inflow. Next slide. Then there's also a Minnelusa well there in red, so both of them are plotted together, and they always plot right. They operate in tandem. They are very close. Once in a while, you can see the Madison is usually a bit higher, and in some cases, the Minnelusa is as much as a few feet lower. Next slide. This is the flow record for Cleghorn Springs, at the hatchery, and then the city has always historically had an intake up at, we always called it separately Jackson Spring at the upper end of the complex. And the pumping at the city intake historically has made a huge effect on the amount of flow coming out the outlet down there. And during the drought of the early 2000s, we were down to just over 6 cubic feet per second there. That's measured right at the outfall from Cleghorn. So it behaves very similarly. They're not, I guess, like the number 6 well that you speak of, it probably doesn't have much effect on those springs. The real effect is the regional effect, that basically Rapid City with their wells is able to regionally affect the head and the Madison and Minaloosa. It's during droughts, I'll qualify that. When you got lots and lots of recharge, it's inconsequential. During droughts, at some point in time, we'll see enough demand that they'll have trouble at Cleghorn. So I'm very near the end. That may be the last one. I don't know. Is there any more slides?
No, that's it.
So, they'll throw out a cost estimate on, what would it take to, measure Lime Creek. And we can talk about whether that's something we might be interested in.
Okay, thanks for the update. It's very interesting. Okay, now we go to, let's see, we're down at 13 now. Vote on an action to take a look at purchasing a CD investment. And Ron Coth's been getting us some information along with Dan Mullally. So, Ron, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dan. A couple years ago or so, the board decided that it was in our best interest of stewards of some of that taxpayer money that we hold in reserve for whenever we need to spend it, was to take it out of some of the low-paying, local accounts and to invest in some CDs. And we had, at one time, 2 CDs. One was a 12-month, one was a 24-month. They were paying roughly the same, 2 or a little bit more % interest. And those came due. The last one came due, I think it was our last meeting that we rolled it into our extreme money market savings account, which you can see reflected on page 9 of 17 of the packet from today. So we've got about $548,000 in that extreme money market, paying us 0.7%, which on an annual basis, generates about $3,400. So at our August meeting, when we rolled that last CD that matured into our stream money markets account, Director Driscoll suggested that we might investigate some higher rates of return that might be available from another vendor. And so we did that. We inquired at Raymond James Financial. We also inquired at the bank that we did have the CDs in and also have our checking and stuff in. That's the Baptist Community Bank. So on page 17 of 17, you'll see generally reflected what the results of that inquiry was on rates of return that would be open to us. I called today and there are some minor changes. For example, on the far right column of that first table, the 6-month CD from Raymond James has declined to 3.8% from 3.9%. The annual rate is the same at 4.1%. So we wanted to also ask Raymond James about the security of any money we might invest with them with a CD in contrast to the bank. There's not really much difference there in that if we invest $250,000 or less, it's all FDIC insured in a similar fashion to what the bank rate would be or the bank protection would be. So at our last executive meeting, and I guess I ran it up. We don't have it on the chart. I made the an example and using $250,000 of that $548,000 we now have in the extreme money maker. If we took $250,000 and invested in a CD, if we invested at the current rate of return, $250,000 with Raymond James, we would net, as stewards of that money, on the 6-month CD, about $8,875. With the 12-month one, we would net $97.50. And I say net because Raymond James charges a 0.25% origination fee. So on $250,000, that's $625. They charge us to basically generate the paper and then invest that CD. So we have a range of options that would go from a 3-month CD that's now paying 3.3%, 3.35%, to a 12-month CD that's paying 4.15%. If we wanted to do a little better on being stewards of the money than just having it sit in that 0.7% extreme money market CD. The lady at Raymond James, and you can read this all over the internet or you can talk to your own financial advisor, there's some thought that the rates of return are going to potentially increase slightly from what they are now into the middle of maybe 2023, depending upon how the Federal Reserve raises, the basis points, on interest. So there's always that give and take of, and the money market people, or the people at Raymond James recommend, if you really want to be the most conservative and take advantage of any interest rate increases, however small they might be, is to go with a 3-month CD and then, just keep rolling, some amount of money through up to your maximum amount you want to invest. And again, I used a $250,000 example, basically because that gives us plenty of operating capital for, our annual expenses plus the money that we have obligated through projects. We don't ever get short. We've still got hundreds of thousands of dollars immediately available to us without having to tap a CD. So at our executive meeting, we talked about, maybe we should just go with a 6-month one. Which would net us $8,875, or maybe a 12-month one that would net us $9,750 on that $250,000. I'm not so sure we want to be continually working with these on a 3-month basis. It's probably not that big a deal, but right now it requires board action, whenever we do something. And so the executive committee thought it would probably be a good idea as stewards of that money to at least invest in a 6-month or a 12-month, CD with about $250,000 and increase that, I guess, payback to our fund that would then be available for doing projects in the future.
Do we have a minimum balance we need to keep in the money market?
I don't know.
I'm not aware of a minimum balance, but I can't imagine it being, above $250,000. But we can check that.
I'm thinking, why wouldn't we want to put $500,000 in the CDs?
Well, we have some obligations. So.
We could look at that and be a little more. We could get a little tighter. We could invest more. We just want to be sure that we have enough operating funds to cover our budget obligations of $212,000. And then our annual budget that we usually program out at about about $230,000. We don't spend that much, but we do have a budget for that. But we could get more aggressive.
Have more revenues coming in.
We could have. Yeah, we basically have $100,000 on the table yet for this year coming in. Our revenue for this year will be $230,877, and we still have not received $100,000 of that. And of course, as soon as we get into 2023, then again we have another tax year coming in. So We could get more aggressive.
What's Raymond James' minimum requirement for a CD purchase?
I don't think there's a minimum. I didn't ask for a minimum, but I know that, I'm looking at some stuff from my mom. I kind of got interested in it because she's got some things going on, and they're willing to accept $10,000, so I don't think there's a minimum we would need to be concerned with. But we could get more aggressive than the $250 I used as an example, and then the money we get back would just be more increase in interest.
We've always held that in 2 CDs
Yeah.
previously.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
So we could go with a ladder there, and go, I guess we could do the 3-month and a 6-month or
That's
something
what I
like
think,
that.
of 3
Yeah,
and 6, and then
sure.
see what's
Director
happening. 'Cause
Driscoll.
I agree with him, I think rates are gonna go up.
Okay. So we want to be shorter than longer because they're going to see some pop
Yeah.
in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
So 3.8, 6 months, and the 3-month is how much?
They offer a 3-month rate of 3.35
3.3.
and a 6-month rate of 3.8. So we could do $500,000 in those,
Half
as a
and
ladder,
three, half and
half
six.
and half, yeah.
Yeah,
And then just watch what happens as the new year begins and the Fed rate does whatever they do.
that's better than what we had the last, rate of return, better than we had the last go.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we do that, put $250,000 into a 3-month CD and $250,000 into a 6-month CD with Raymond James.
So were those rates with the upfront cost 0.25?
The rate that they pay is 3.35 and 3.8. We're going to knock 0.25% off of each one of those for their fee.
Okay.
Well, they charge, let me back up. They charge us $625 on $250,000, but they pay 3.35 and 3.8% on the money we put in. So they get so our money that we go in, it's $250,000 minus $625,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
And then they pay those rates.
I'll mention, just to be thorough, I went back to Black Hills Community Bank, and they can't, well, those are the numbers that you see in the packet. But he also said that he's not willing, he doesn't have any idea what rates are gonna do. He said people build in what they expect to happen into the rates, so they may not go up like people think they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just add that.
Right, so there is always that little bit of a roll of dice
I
that
don't think they're gonna skyrocket, but I think they're gonna go up.
maybe we get 0.5% more out of them if that we do a 3-month one, and we can, bump that increase in revenue that we get, that passive revenue a little bit. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Well,
Is there,
You got it
for lack
started.
of second, but
Yeah, is there?
do we have a second
Your
on that
motion
motion?
was to invest $500,000?
Yes. Yeah, I'll
Half in
second
three-
it, so we
half in
have a
3 months,
discussion.
half in 6 months.
Wait a minute now. Funds on hand, we got 565,000. You want to invest 500,000 out of the 565,000 that we have on cash on hand?
Yeah. And we've got $100,000 coming in yet
Coming
this
in.
year. The question would be, when does Green Valley want their money?
Yeah.
Well, I can bring that up.
That's our question.
The question is, they don't know for sure. I talked to the engineer, Ron Bang from Interstate, this morning, and rural development is where the biggest chunk of money is going to come from. They submitted their preliminary engineering report. They came back and had some comments which they've already addressed, and it's back in for the final review. The engineer that was stationed here in Rapid City has moved. And so they're trying to get another engineer to look at that from someplace, I don't know, he didn't either. So it's on hold.
I don't think 3 months is that long a time for him if something.
No, and
comes
so
up.
anyway, I told him our next meeting is December, and, maybe he'll know more by then, he's hoping to, but I know Dan knows the treasurer out there, and I think they're a little frustrated too not getting government approval for that project, for whatever reason. But
Yeah, the 3-month one, if we invested today, would mature on January 17th.
Yeah.
I would say that we probably would not make that payment,
I don't think we're gonna need to
Before
make a
that.
payment before that.
just based on what he told me today.
The 6-month one is April 14th.
Okay.
So by then, we're gonna know what kind of is going on,
Do
maybe.
you have a question?
I'll shed a little more light. You know, Raymond James came up because I happened to be in talking with Dan. And he said, "Well, we're looking at CDs at such and such a rate." I says, "That's impossible." He said, "No, that's for real." I said, "Well, I'll call my guy at Raymond James, and they're paying about double." You know, so anyhow, I've talked with them a fair amount. The Raymond James does not issue the CD. They are a vendor, so you're buying them on the open market from whoever is issuing them. Raymond James is just a broker. They provide that service. So minimums, whatever they are, we're talking about way more than anybody's minimums. They sell only the FDIC insured CD. They won't touch the other stuff. So 250,000 is the limit for each CD.
Okay,
But if you
correct.
buy CDs from different issuers, each issuer will insure up to 250,000.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go into that, but yeah, that's the fact, yeah.
Right. So I'm dealing
I was gonna ask that.
with this exact same issue because, you know, we recently put my mother-in-law in the memory care and sold her house, and now we have to deal with her house money. And I had run a scenario. You know, the Raymond James people say, well, it really makes sense, go with 3 month because it's going up. So far, right now they're saying they expect the Fed to increase 3/4 of a point and then 1/2 a point. And so far, what they say to expect has been exactly what's happened. If you did 3 month at 3.5% as opposed, or 3.45 was what I use. They change each week, as opposed to 1 year at 4.1%. You come out way ahead with buying the 3 month and then 9 months worth of a year at a higher rate. You know, in my opinion, the 3 month is clearly the way to go, and at some point in time this will level off and you don't have to do 3 months, or you can start saying, well, let's do a year. If you would ever say, well, all of a sudden we need this money, at your credit union, so my mother-in-law's money's at Black Hills Federal Credit Union, it costs you 1.5% of your CD amount to terminate early, which is more than what their interest rates are. If through Raymond James, whoever the broker is, they just put it back out on the open market, and it's really like a bond, so it's going to get bought again. And if the interest rate has gone up, the face value will be lower, but it's a very minimal penalty. It's you get all your interest and you lose just a little bit off your face value, and it depends on what of the interest rate's done. But if you go with 3 month, you know, and however much we would choose to put in, it's very feasible to have a small one like a 3 month at 50,000 and a 3 month at 250,000, and maybe something in between or whatever. One more thought is, you know, we don't want to have to deal with this as a full board over and over, but could we not basically vote to authorize the executive board to make decisions on what to do with CDs when they renew, and, you know, eventually get to where we've got, you know, maybe a few more at longer terms once the interest rates get up there. Interest is going to go up for some number of months. At some point in time, it will level off. But there's a few more things that I know about the situation.
Was there a second to the motion?
Yes, it had been seconded by Ron.
Oh, Ron, second, okay. Any more discussion? So you have the motion up there now, or he's putting it up there?
Well, I think we should really have some sort of a substitute motion that I could make, but I'd really rather feel our way through it and see what everyone's sense is. What is our total amount that we feel we could put into CDs? Is it $500,000? Is it 500,000? 400,000?
That's kind of what I asked, because I
And
I understand we have more. We have another 100,000 next year. We got 240,000 we collect in a year. So I mean, we have revenue coming in, so we're about 340,000 next year.
Yeah, it seems like $500,000 is feasible as long as we don't have to pay Green Valley like tomorrow.
We won't be paying them tomorrow. I'm guessing it's going to be after the first of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, probably spring.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that.
Been over 2 years.
So we've got 548 in the money market, so that's cash on hand. So if we said we want to work with $500,000, that leaves 48,000 to work with, and more coming in every 6. Is it every 6 months that the taxes come in?
Approximately, yeah. They trickle in and we get 2 big payments. I'm not sure if I got the motion correct here. Was it a 3-month?
And 6 months.
3 and 6.
Yeah, 3 and 6.
And 6 months.
Yeah, 3 and 6.
So I can give you an answer maybe on the taxes here. In a minute.
Well, the second half is due here at the end of this month, so we ought to start seeing money here November?
I paid
Let me
mine.
look at last year and see what happened.
I haven't paid mine yet. I'm waiting.
I'm waiting too.
Well, it's coming soon. Well, while we're looking for that, I guess one thing I might suggest is a 3-month at 250,000, a 3-month at 50,000. So we've got something that comes around, you know, well, if you ended up having to cash one out, it would be a small one. So a 3-month at 250, a 3-month at 50, which would leave one more 3-month at 200,000. And I think if we're going to authorize the executive committee to deal with what do you do 3 months from now, that should be a separate motion, but I would intend to make that motion when we get done with this. But rather than make that as a motion, I'd just soon we sound it out before we change it.
So looking at last year in May, we got about 92,000 for the big one, and then in November, so that would be coming right up here, November 19th, we got 83,000. So those were the 2 big ones, and then anywhere from 2 to 10,000 in between there.
Well, if it's coming in November, maybe there's no need to have 3 of them. We just have 2 of them at 250, and I think we are best off to do a 3-month and then see where the rates are at.
So your recommendation is to do 2 at 3 months instead of 1 at 3 and 1 at 6.
All right, and we need to look back at the rate, 3.9 as opposed to 3.4 or 3.35 or whatever.
Yeah, today it was 3.35 and 3.8.
It'll
this morning.
They'll have new rates next week. Every week they come out. But
So you want to do both at 3 months?
well, since we've got 90,000 whatever coming in November, basically, there's a bunch of money coming in, so we don't really need a small one in case all of a sudden you need emergency money.
Well, that's the motion that was made. That's on the floor, right there.
Are we amending this, or?
Well,
I thought 3 and 6 sounds good.
3 and 6 sounds good.
Yeah, 3 and 6 sounds good to me, too.
Okay.
What we have out there looks good.
I was just a little bit nervous to having 500,000 out there, but it sounds like we're okay.
fair enough if the consensus is go 3 and 6. I mean, the differential on the interest is not huge by any means.
All right, are we ready to vote? Looks like it.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know if Wendy knows the motion.
Did you know what the motion is, Wendy? 200.
I do.
Okay, 250,000 at 3 months and 250,000 at 6 months.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, thanks a lot for putting all that work in and giving this information to us. It was, it's very nice to have that in front of us so we could make a good decision.
So, since it's kind of the same topic, can I make a motion to authorize the executive board to make future decisions on CDs and et cetera, where we keep our money? And it's easy enough to bring it to the board to discuss anytime.
Motion's been made and seconded to authorize the executive board for future decisions on investing.
What does that mean?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay, so let's make it more specific in terms
Really,
of...
what does that mean?
Let's make it more specific in terms of decisions regarding certificates of deposit versus a regular bank account.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think
no stocks, no.
Yeah, CDs.
CDs.
Yeah, this is just CDs, Wendy.
No mutual funds, just CDs in our regular money market account.
Sure. Understood. May I speak?
Sure. Go ahead.
I think that should always be up for a vote for the quorum.
For the full board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I do. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Because it should not just be up to 3 different people, 4 different people.
Yeah, 4. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tom, what do you have?
I'm going to agree with Wendy.
Okay.
I just know in past experiences when I was not on the majority of the board that things were kind of ran a little roughshod, and I believe bringing it up to a full vote, it's in the eye of the public. I know everybody here on this board is well-intentioned, and I understand the feasibility of it, but as the oversight element, I would prefer it to be a full vote from the board every time. Even if it's 3 months and it's annoying, I still think that's, from the oversight and the governance and compliance avenue, that is probably the proper decision. Not saying I don't trust any of you, but just from oversight.
Okay, Linda?
In my comment, I agree with Wendy and Thomas too. It's not going to take that long to do a vote on it, and when you're talking $250,000, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And it should be part of the record.
I agree with all 3 of you.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Yeah, withdraw it.
Okay. Motion's been
But it would be nice if the executive committee could have it kind of figured out.
Well, that's fair. I mean, get the information available, just like we did here tonight. You know, it's good information. We can make a logical decision as a full board. So the motion maker and the second have decided to withdraw their motion. So no action will be taken on that, so,
So could I circle back to this one?
Sure.
How many signatures are we gonna have on these CDs? And who will it be?
that's a good question.
Well, let's
I would
find
say
out what the
it's-
minimum number is, and then if it's 2 or
Taking
3,
into account Director Harris won't be here
right.
next year.
What do we have now with the bank? How many, is there 3 of us?
There's 2 required and there's 3 available.
Yeah, I would say it would be just the way we do it with our normal bank, have 3
Okay,
signatures.
we'll need to pick those 3 then.
I would say the treasurer should be one of them.
Yeah, and I could be one, then we need one more. Maybe it's,
I can, is that somebody else wants to? All right,
You step in there.
okay. So that's 3, I guess.
When you
Yeah,
set
right
up
now
an
it's-
account, make sure that you set up for online transfer capability. Or I guess I'll suggest that. I mean, you can basically be able to move your funds between our current bank and move it to them. So you don't
Okay.
have to write checks and stuff. We'd have to trust whoever's pushing the button on it, but I don't think that's any different than trusting them to write a check, so it's,
It'd be the same as our administrator does now.
Yeah,
it's,
it would be.
it's just far and away most convenient.
Yep, agreed. Okay, are we through with this item? Got
I
everything?
need to talk to you, see what you mean by that.
Well, you can just do online transfer. So from Raymond James, I can transfer to my checking account. I just push the button and the money moves there. It takes 2 days. Or if I want to move from my checking account to Raymond James, I initiate that from my bank. But at Raymond James, they can set up the paperwork to allow that in both directions. So do that when you set up the account.
Sounds reasonable. All right. So that was item 13. Item 14, the only thing I had, I've already reported on my discussion with the engineers in Green Valley, so that's all I have. Is there any items from directors?
I guess I do.
Okay.
I have a nephew that was in town, and we went to the outdoor campus today, and we're looking around, and if any of you have been there, in one of the display areas, they have metal fish on the wall, and they have people and companies that have donated to the outdoor campus are recognized. And I was not aware, but West Dakota Water Development District has a fish.
Oh, can you send that?
Yeah. And
We should put it on our website.
And according to, they have another fish that size, the donation was between $25,000 and $49,000. And I can try to find out more. I don't know when the donation was made and for what amount.
By
But-
West Dakota, you talking about?
Yeah,
Wow.
yep,
Yeah, we should
yep,
definitely
see?
put that on our
West
website.
Dakota.
I see that.
Yeah, and we could put that on there.
Yeah.
Well, I saw that, and then we went over to the actual fish aquarium, and we're looking at the fish, and there's a small sign there, and once again, West Dakota Water Development District is on the
Well,
plaque.
we funded that, basically funded the dredge. I'm sure that's probably one of the reasons.
No, this is the aquarium. The aquarium there
Yeah.
that has the fish in it, that's been there a long time. There's a few people's name, Black Hills Fly Fishers, Cabela's,
Oh,
are all sponsors, but I can find out more and I can share those photos with you.
Yeah, we should definitely put that
find
on.
out how much money we gave them. 'cause
Yeah.
I don't think
And
we
I've
did.
been in there so many times and I've never noticed it.
And I guess I haven't either, but they jumped out today.
Oh, thanks for bringing that to our
Yeah.
attention. I'll have to look the next time I'm down
Yeah.
there. Any other items from directors? Seeing none, items from Dan Millow.
Okay, the redistricting has been approved by the water board. Jay Gilbertson asked me if every year that we have the water development districts have a legislative session that's put together by Jay Gilbertson, who is the executive director with the East Dakota Water Development District, and it's in early January. And if we send anybody there, we get to meet with the legislators. But they also have a couple board meetings of East Dakota and then another one I forgot.
James Valley.
James Valley.
Mhm.
Okay. And they have speakers usually, so he was asking me if anybody had any ideas for people to give talks, and I thought, well, maybe rotating basins might be somebody to get in there. Maybe Missouri Pipeline with Cheryl. So I'll just throw that out there. If anybody has any comments, let me know. And do we want to bring up the 30-day on the, okay, the grant application we have on our website does not really say how soon we want that before we act on that request. So at the executive board meeting, we were thinking of requiring that they get their grant request in at least 30 days before
The meeting.
that it would be requested at. So I'll turn it to you, Director Coth, if you want to.
Well, we just thought that it would be in the proponent's best interest as well as our best interest to have a little bit of time to receive applications. So if it was incomplete, like the application was essentially incomplete from, the water development folks today, we could give that feedback to them, and then they could either figure out how to get it complete or defer their, time that they would spend at the board. And just not come here for nothing, basically, and give us time to look at it and have a little bit back and forth. Like Dan got the notice from the Western Regional folks last Thursday that they were going to have a proposal here.
It's not enough time.
So that barely got time for him to get it in the packet.
Right.
That didn't seem like it was feeling very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I think a 30-day notice would be nice.
That gives you some back and forth time.
And then I would say 30 days, and then just put a caveat in. If a water system or something like that has an emergency, like Keystone, their SCADA system went down.
Yeah.
As an example. So if they needed some money to buy a piece of equipment for a water treatment plant or whatever.
The board can waive that 30-day under emergency circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we should have that included in that provision.
Okay, I guess the consensus, I should take that as an action to just put that in there. I don't think we need to vote.
Yeah, we don't need to vote on that, so let's just do that. Very good. Is everybody okay with that?
I had to take a call there. It's 30-day notice of what now?
To receive a proposal
Receive
for request
a
for
grant,
funds.
a proposal for a grant from us for whatever.
So we have time to look at it before the board meeting.
For
Instead of a
example,
few.
the folks that came in earlier and asked for $25,000 told Dan they were going to file that request last Thursday. That was the day he was assembling the packets.
No, they told me, actually Cheryl had called me. She had called me on the Friday before, and then I called her back on Saturday. And Saturday's when I heard about it.
Anyway, it was pretty
less than a week.
quick.
Less than a week.
And we could have given them the feedback then that, they needed to kind of comply with what we asked for example, in our proposal, which was a listing of where they were getting money instead of just saying, we think we're going to get money from folks.
Well, I guess my comment would be that I've put in a lot of agenda items that involve funding, and the large number of them, far and away majority, have been much less than 30 days. I've always worked with Dan to, have the paperwork to him by the time the meeting packet is going to be assembled. So that's kind of a change of direction for me personally.
You haven't filled out the form.
I haven't filled out the form, but maybe I'm gonna have to from now on. I usually just make, here's,
Well, I think the difference is you're a board member, and we have people that aren't board members that are asking for money. It's for people outside of our board.
like we go, is 15 days enough? I understand
We picked a number.
An arbitrary number.
We just said 30 days, but.
15 days be enough. I mean, the executive committee is usually 1 week before the meeting.
Yeah, 1 week, yeah.
And typically it's a couple days later that the packet gets done, so that would be.
The packet part of it is not too big a deal. For like 15 days would be plenty. But I'm thinking more of you guys.
We don't see it until we get the packet,
Well,
usually.
Right.
not necessarily. I guess it's up. We can
Yeah,
decide
15
to send
days
it
would
out,
probably be all right.
distribute it.
15 days would probably do it, just some more lead time than like tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm okay with 15 days.
Sounds better to
We just
me.
picked a number.
Could we say we prefer 30, but 15 is kind of more of a harder
I think we just picked a number. Just pick a 15. I'm fine with
Okay.
15
Yeah,
days.
just
I'm good with
15 is
15.
good.
Everybody else fine with that?
Sure.
Uh-huh.
You fine with that, Wendy?
Uh-huh.
Okay. 15 days it is then.
Okay, then my final item is my contract is up in April, and
We just signed your contract.
seems like it, doesn't it? And I'm leaning towards not renewing it, so I want to give you guys a heads up so you can start thinking about the course of action. And if it turns out you're not ready, I can keep going on a month-by-month basis maybe, but want to start thinking about that. So there are really a couple different things, and that's who's going to do it, and then the office space. That kind of ties into it a little bit.
You have any recommendations?
One of the things that we talked about is getting with Black Hills Council of Local Governments and visit with them about possibly taking over that duty. When I worked for the city, they did. I mean, that organization.
That organization.
It did,
Okay.
and they actually had the meetings at their office back
Okay.
in that day, and then of course it's changed. But we could. I'll go up and talk to Jennifer Sitzma, and she's the executive director up there, and see if that's something they might be interested in.
If we could get them to be interested and it was amenable to the rest of the board, it would probably be pretty desirable. They're in contact with all these little communities around the area, some which are not in our district, but a lot of them are. They have staff that are there all the time, so.
They're there all the time.
They're all there all the time, so
Yeah.
if they had a question, they have lots of capabilities like the GIS and stuff if we ever wanted to do anything to help with the website or, figure something out. And we might even be able to co-locate, because really the office is primarily a filing system storage area. It isn't a
Yeah,
big
it is.
walk-in traffic deal. So we
Yeah,
can
we
eliminate that
We don't get
office
much traffic
expense.
at all.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I'm going to go up and talk.
Yeah.
I'm going to go up and talk to Jennifer about that and see if that's a
Okay.
possibility. So that's one thing
Yeah.
that we're going to take a look at. If anybody else has an idea,
I just want to say something, Dan.
sure.
Malali, you have been amazing. You help guide new members through so many obstacles, and I'm just so grateful for you. No matter what you decide, I get it. I do. And I just want to say how amazing I think you are. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, Dan?
I guess that's it. I'll just say I've enjoyed working with the various board members over the years too. And I'm glad that we were able to accomplish a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, I reiterate what Wendy said about you. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job. Are there any items from the public?
Not today.
No, thank you, and thank you for.
Could I jump back in real quick?
Sure.
Zadik still hasn't paid that $750. I'm not sure.
I'll-
Do you have any suggestions? Because every time I ping him, it's like, we got your request.
I'll twist their arm a little.
Okay.
There's a transition going on there, so anyhow, I'll check with him.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
You don't need to. I declare the meeting adjourned. I forgot my gavel again.
Claire.
That's
All right.
We're gone.
Okay, Wendy, have a good night. Thank you.